Hi and welcome to the Parent Guide to GCSE podcast, episode number 18. Today's guest is Tash Walker and she'll be talking about gender and sexuality as part of our difficult but important conversations series. This was originally broadcast as a live StreamYard event.
Evening, everybody. So we are here today for another one in our series of difficult but important conversations to have with your child. And today we are talking about gender and sexuality, and we have the very lovely Tash Walker with us. Tash, do you want to kind of say hi, introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tash Walker. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm one of the co-chairs of Switchboard, the LGBT plus helpline. Just to give you an idea of what that is, it's a helpline open to anyone who wants to talk about gender identity, sexuality, emotional well-being and sexual health. And we open 10 a.m. till 10 p.m, 365 days a year. And you can get in touch on the number below or via our website for live chat or email.
Fab. I shall leave that up for a little bit and ping between the two. Guys, if you've got questions as we go along, hi Ian, then pop them in the comments and we will see what we can do to answer them. But I figure if we kick things off with something that I'm guessing people are going to be asking about after your introduction, let's talk pronouns first up, because it's something I'm seeing lots more of on social media. What do we need to know as parents?
Yeah, for sure. So when I introduced myself then, I said Tash and my pronouns are she and they. And what that's doing is it's opening up a situation and a space so that anyone else who I'm introducing myself to, who feels like they want to share their pronouns, maybe their pronouns aren't as obvious as lots of other people's or the traditional sense of pronouns, that binary she and her, they then know that they are able to tell me their pronouns. But what's really important is that they're not the person who has to go first. Because what we're trying to do is to open up a world of acceptance. And so I guess to sort of talk about what that means in terms of pronouns, it basically means that if someone's gender identity is not how they necessarily express themselves or how we would interpret them to be, then maybe the pronouns that are given to the binary way of thinking, male and female, aren't comfortable with them. So they may say, that let's for example say that someone was assigned male at birth, but they consider themselves to be a trans woman and they use the pronouns she and her. It's really important as part of the process of anyone's transition or anyone's experience of expression that we use the pronouns that that person feels comfortable with. And that's really all it's about. And just by doing it as someone who maybe isn't transgender, just opens up that nice safe space to say, hey, I get it. I understand. This is what I want to be called. What do you want to be called? But also one point to remember, actually, which is really worth noting, is that it's only for people who feel comfortable to share their pronouns. Not everyone always does. So, it's really great if, I don't know, for example, you were hosting a party and you had name tags, people could put their name and you could suggest that other people put their pronouns, not that they have to, because we don't want to force anyone to do that. So I went off a little bit on that one, but yeah, you get the idea.
No, really, really useful, because it's something that I think if you haven't had to think about it because you are very traditional and you don't have perhaps any friends who identify themselves differently than they would perhaps be identified by everybody else, then it's not something you really think about. It's, I think we're all at a point now where seeing people on TV who are gay or bisexual, or that's more normalized almost. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of issues around it, I'm sure, but it's something that you do see now, whereas transgender people, not so much. Like there's bits, but not so much. So you kind of, that is something that is more difficult to get your head around, I think.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point as well, bringing in media to it, because I think that we are further along with the media representation of sexuality. I think it's still complicated and still a lot to go with representation, not just making the story about someone coming out, but someone being an athlete and they just happen to be gay as well. But what is interesting around representation of transgender in media is that it's often been a joke, and the man dressing as a woman. And so, as a way to sort of change that and move things forward, it's really great if we start with us here and now and we make that step, which shows we believe in equality. And actually, on that note, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a great documentary called Disclosure on Netflix, which is all about transgender representation in TV and film, and it's amazing. So I recommend that to anyone who wants to learn more. But while you were just saying something, which reminded me, the pronoun side of stuff. So a really great way to maybe explain how it feels to be misgendered, so that's using the wrong pronoun, is to think about how you would feel if someone used the opposite pronoun that you feel comfortable with. So if someone called me he, how would I feel about that? Maybe I wouldn't feel particularly great and a bit confused. So I think that's the sort of key to it.
Yeah, I was trying to think about this earlier and about the kind of questions that people get, because obviously it's not something I've experienced, so I don't know. I'm going from what I've seen in the media, but I was thinking it might be something vaguely along the lines of, although quite a lot more serious than me. So just over a year ago, I decided I was going to be a vegetarian for no particular reason, and since then I don't necessarily mention it to people unless I need to, because it's not really any of their business. But if I do, I've had the odd few people who've gone, really? What? No meat at all? Not even bacon sandwiches? Like, no, just, and because it's not something they've ever thought about or understood, I've got that almost accusation, like, how can you, and I feel like that might be a similar sort of feeling, that because we don't understand, like, really, you've never even, but you feel like this about this because we haven't done it ourselves. And that I think is a lot of what the pressure is with talking to our kids about stuff, because we don't know, because we haven't felt it. So having the conversations with them and opening up that dialogue about stuff is a bit challenging. It feels a bit weird, I'd imagine, to start a conversation. How would you deal with something if your friend suddenly announced that they were, because it's a bit out of the blue, whereas by the time their friend has announced something, if they've responded really badly, it's going to be too late, because odds are there'll be someone that they talk to who is going through something related to their gender or sexuality, whether everybody knows that or not. And the way that they approach it is going to be challenging. I mean, I know from teaching lots of teenage boys, we've had lots and lots of discussions about how using the word gay to describe something insultingly is not cool. And here's why. And they're like, but why? Because some people are, and therefore you're using them as an insult. It's not okay. It's difficult to get that in people's heads from my experience. So is there you've mentioned the documentary. Would that be a good sort of starting point to start those kind of conversations? Watching that with, children or teenagers would be a really great way to have the conversations, because what it's doing is it's sharing people's stories and their experiences. And you know what, we don't know what it feels like to be anyone else but ourselves. And that could be the same for two transgender people. That could be the same for two gay people. No one knows how anyone else feels. You just know how you feel. And really what it's about is becoming a good ally, because actually that's all we really need to do, isn't it? Approach everyone with kindness and understanding, and you've got a perfect world. But I think that what you're sort of hitting the nail on here is really interesting. It's like, how can parents set the right example, but also how can they help their children to understand better? And I think it's by leading. So, you've already touched on this thing of feeling when we start to learn about something, when we start to understand something that's different, or we encounter something that's different, whether it's vegetarianism, whether it's a different culture, different sexuality, gender identity, it's different, and that scares us. So because we don't know, we immediately go to fear, and fear is exclusion. Whereas actually the first step to being a good ally or understanding anything is to say, you know what, this is going to be hard. I'm going to find it uncomfortable because it's challenging my entire life worth of societal understanding and upbringing, which is all very traditional and binary, depending on how old you are.
this is going to be difficult and I'm going to have to learn, I'm going to have to confront myself. But by doing that and showing that to your children, that's huge. That's so powerful. You're saying to your kids, you know what, it's okay to not understand something. Just take your time. And really, at the end of the day, how do you support people who are not like you? You empathize, you listen, you give space, you're open-minded, and you learn. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about with the pronouns. Someone tells you their pronouns, you get them wrong. It was a mistake. Apologize, move on, try again. It's not a big deal. And I think that is really the first step to really educating yourself first in order to really educate your children. You know, and doing that together, I think, is brilliant. You know, if your child has a friend who's come out to them and they confide in you about it, answer the questions that you can answer. But if you can't, just do that research together, learn together. I think that would be a really amazing experience. Yeah. And I like what you said about the whole don't be afraid to make the mistakes, because that is what I would be worried about. My only real experience in terms of pronouns is there was a student that I taught way back when who identified as male, but his parents were separated, and one parent was quite supportive and the other one was not so supportive. So as teachers, we had to be super careful about how we described said child in any kind of written communication or verbal communication with parents, because you were never quite sure which parent it would get to and whether they were then going to be offended or not. And so they were some of the most carefully worded emails I've ever written, I think, because it's challenging, and it's habit as well. We have a friend whose son decided he didn't want to be William anymore. We'd known him as William since he was very, very tiny. He decided he wanted to be Billy, and that was it. It's only a contraction of his name. Could I cope with that? I kept calling him William, and he just very gently, it's Billy now. And I think that's it, the same sort of thing. We've got to just not beat ourselves up over it and keep trying, because so long as we're trying, that's the best we can do there, right? And if we can get that message across that so long as you're understanding and you're doing your best, we're not going to be perfect, and everybody knows that, and that's okay, I reckon. Yeah, totally. I think that's a good tip I just thought of when talking about the pronoun side of stuff, is that just use the person's name if you don't know what their pronouns are, or use a gender neutral pronoun like they and them. And it's reminded me of something else as well, you know, like that question that lots of younger kids maybe ask, not so much older children, but I've got a little niece, and she would, you know, I can imagine her saying, is that a boy or a girl? Is that a man or a woman? And actually there's something really small in the way that you answer that kind of question that maybe sets the tone. And you could just say, instead of saying, oh, that's a man or that's a woman, you could just say, you know what, I don't know. You know, sometimes it's hard to tell whether they're a man or a woman from when we look at them. So we just have to see what they say. Or, you know, it's about changing but you know, you've touched on it. It's about changing this sort of really hard-coded historical narrative of male, female, boy, girl, man, woman, wife, husband. You know, it's breaking down all of these barriers, but we're all doing it too, you know. And what's it called? So it's called the LGBTQIA plus communities now. This is the acronym that's the moment. I can explain what that those mean.
Please do. Lots of letters.
Yeah, great. It's a lot of letters. So it used to be gay, right? Back in it was probably a lot of things before then, but the first emergement of that was in the late 60s, gay, and then you had lesbian, and then it became lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and then the I and the A stand for intersex and asexual, and the plus signifies everyone else who doesn't identify as cisgender, and I'll explain what that means in a second, and also so cisgendered and heterosexual. So I think my point there really is that we're evolving as a community as well. And so that's the idea, isn't it? As society, we all evolve. As humans, we evolve. And so we're still learning what those languages and different versions of things mean. And so is everyone else. So we're all in this together, really. That's the key thing.
Yeah. So talk us through cisgender.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so like gender terms, there's quite a lot of gender different gender terms, and they can get really, really confusing, especially when we're talking about sex or gender or sexuality or gender expression. It can get really overwhelming. But what cisgender means is basically that the person identifies with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So if someone was born and they were assigned male at birth and they see themselves as male now, then they would be called cisgender. And I guess it's probably worth explaining why that's a really important term. Why don't we just call it normal, for example? Well, it's because there's no normal. There is no correct way of being. We're all on this wonderful spectrum of sexuality and gender identity, and that can be expressed in different ways, and through different things. One day we could wake up and you could feel a lot more masculine, or the definition that we understand of masculine, and other days a bit more feminine. So having cisgender as a term allows us to recognize that cisgender is one way of being, but transgender is also another way of being. So there's not just the normal and the other, it's balanced.
Yeah, definitely very important, I think. So in terms of, I guess for parents, I'm thinking the reasons that they might want to have these conversations with their kids would be either because their child is in some way going through an issue related to their gender or their sexuality, or their friends are in some way going through something similar. So things like, when they start a new school and they discover they've got a classmate who has two mums, or something along, those kind of things. So I think they're kind of two separate situations. The it's okay to be who you are conversation, and the it's okay for other people to be who they are. Let's just make sure we understand and stay open-minded kind of conversation. So it's tricky. Is there, I'm just wondering whether there's a good reason to start the conversation if you think that perhaps your child might be going through some kind of changes that are making them wonder, and they're not sure whether they want to say something. You hear quite often kids are coming out and their parents are like, yeah, we knew that. It's okay.
Yeah.
We don't need to be stressing about it. We knew. So when
I think that's a wonderful way to put it. Don't wait for the child to come out to you. Don't necessarily try and out your child either by saying, are you gay? Not that, if that feels appropriate, then that's fine. You have the judgment between the parent-child relationship, which is really individual and unique to those people. But I think it's about celebrating differences, celebrating diversity. I don't think there's any age too young to start sharing. You get these wonderful kids books now where it is the kid with two mums, or there's a kid who doesn't want to be a boy or a girl, and that's a really great starting point. That's so fantastic that they're around now. But I think that setting examples to your children by talking about different stories that you've read in the news, like celebrating good advances in politics to do with sexuality and gender identity, expressing it in those ways which aren't directed at the child, but letting them know that, hey, I believe in equality, and I believe that no matter what your sexuality or gender identity is, that you're still my kid, we're all equal. And I think that a lot can be said, and it sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier in setting that example for your child. So if someone in your family or a colleague or a friend says something that is offensive, maybe to someone's sexuality or gender identity or race or culture or any marginalized community, that you don't just let it go and laugh it off and just say, oh, that's so and so. That you say in a calm and kind way, because we're all learning, that actually I don't feel very comfortable with you using that term for these reasons, or I don't, maybe we shouldn't use that term anymore. That joke's not actually funny. And immediately then your child sees that you stand up for those people, and so that opens up that channel of communication. That's yeah. And I think we find ourselves doing that when it happens on TV as well, because that's something that we see. That's not all right. That's really good. We have a question that's come in. Oh, okay, cool.
From Ian. You just have to kind of, for the live, you have to sit up slightly so they can see you over the top of the question.
Okay.
So my 16-year-old son came out a few weeks ago. We're very proud of how he and his friends have dealt with this. He seems much happier in himself now. He starts sixth form at a new school in September. as parents, what should we look out for and advise him on in this new unfamiliar environment? He has a few friends who'll be there with him, so he does have a support network in place, but I know he'll be nervous initially.
Oh, that's a lovely message, Ian, and it's great to hear that you're so supportive of your son, and that's great that your son's so much happier now as well. That's a really lovely story to hear. But, you know, starting a new environment is complicated, and that's something that lots of LGBT people can find overwhelming, because it means that we have to come out again, which in itself, you think you have to just come out once and then you're done. But no, every time you meet someone new and they want to learn a bit more about you, then you have to come out. So, I mean, what I would say is the best thing to do is to, you know, it sounds like you're a fantastic parent already, but to say that you're proud of who he is and you 100% behind him and what he believes and what his sexuality is, but that he doesn't have to come out unless he feels he's ready to anyone. So he doesn't have to go into that school, you know, with a rainbow flag flying from side. I mean, he can if he wants, that's fantastic. But it's all a very personal experience. And if he's ready to and he feels comfortable with people, then by all means, you know, he can tell them that he's gay. But if he doesn't feel able to or feel like he's quite ready to yet, then that's totally chill as well. It's all about his own time and his own steps. And it's great to hear that he's got friends who'll be supportive there with him. But I also think it's really important to let him know that if anyone says anything homophobic to him or receives any negative attention, that is not okay, that he lets you know, lets his teachers know if he feels comfortable, so that you can take the necessary steps to get that sorted. But you know, it sounds like he's got a fantastic family and a fantastic group of friends. So I'm sure he'll be absolutely fine. But I remember doing that. I came out around 15, 16. And it is scary, but the older you get, it does get easier.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm just trying to think what we haven't covered yet.
I could talk a bit about more about how to be a good ally. Maybe that would be helpful. Sure. So I think that and this I think goes across everything, but I guess I'll speak to the sort of gender and sexuality side of things. That it's really important not only to challenge yourself first and foremost, but to also talk to your children about stereotypes. You know, that those are really complicated things, and they really embed lots of the negativity that we have around marginalized communities, especially sexuality and gender identity. You know, talk to them about how they can be really divisive and they don't tell the whole story of how someone is. And, you know, again, it goes back to that thing of the best way to explain anything is just to say, how would you feel if you were judged on something based on this or that? It's always the easiest way, I think, to understand stuff, which of course is empathy, the second best thing of being an ally. But I think that, you know, we've talked a lot about language and comments and calling those things out. That's really, really important. But I think being open to learning about language, so learning about the right terms around gender identity and sexuality, what the LGBTQIA plus means, and you know, the longer it gets, the more letters it has. You know, the more that we educate ourselves, the more that we can help educate those around us, and it can have a wonderful domino effect, and that's really, really important. I think when it comes to LGBTQ plus learnings, a really great thing that can be done to show allyship is to learn a lot about the fight for equality that LGBT people have been on. And it's really, really young history, and it's really exciting. It's got everything that you need. You've got police raids, you've got, you know, sex scandals. It's all in there, and you know, it's a really fascinating deep dive into learning where the LGBT plus community is today, but also how far it's still got to go. Just a quick summary or sort of starting point. It was only in 1967 that there was the partial decriminalization of homosexuality. And now, you know, in 2020, we are working towards equality, but it's a complicated thing. And it's a definite learning process, and it's something that we're all sort of trying to move forward with. So I could recommend listening to a couple of podcasts on queer history and just reading and learning what you can. There's some amazing films on Netflix. Proud is a really great film. It's called Pride, actually. And it's the one about the lesbian and gays support the minors. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's a really good film. Go check it out. But ultimately, just keep learning, listening, and educating yourself and reflecting. Just that's the best thing any ally can do.
Definitely. It's pretty much the exact same things we were saying when we were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's understanding from other people's points of view so that you can understand them better and you can be a better ally, because if you haven't experienced it, then you don't know what it feels like, and so you can't properly empathize. So the more that you can find out, the better, and open yourself up to different opportunities to learn more. Because it's not always something that will just present itself into your world. Sometimes you do have to go out and find out some stuff, and that's a good thing. So you host the Logbooks podcast.
Yes, there you go. I didn't even have to do a shameless plug. You did it for me.
And just tell us a little bit about what you do on there and how that might be useful.
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm the co-chair of Switchboard, which is an LGBT plus helpline. But we started back in 1974. So that was just off the back of that partial decriminalisation in 67 that I mentioned. And it was because as people were sort of talking about it more and the government were making these changes, people felt more able to sort of ask questions and reach out to know where the best nightclubs to go to, but also to talk about how it feels to come out and maybe are they gay or whatever it was on their mind at the time. So Switchboard was born, and that's still around today, 46 years later. But in my time at Switchboard, I found these logbooks. So these were the written record of entries that the volunteers took from the calls that they took on the phone, and they go from 1974 to 2003. And they are an absolutely amazing archival treasure. The best book I've ever read. Laughing one minute, crying the next. Terrible jokes squiggled into the margins, but also loads and loads of really heartfelt stories, and most importantly, untold stories that are LGBT plus history. So I started working through these logbooks and reached out and started to interview people who volunteered for the charity, but also who called the charity, and also people who lived through this period of time. So season 1 is out now. It goes from 1974 to 1983. I'm working on season 2 right now, but it's definitely worth a listen. And it's there's some really amazing stories in there. That so much I learned so much as an LGBT plus person, and it's really amazing to hear it through the people that lived through that time. So if you want to learn more about LGBT history from the people who lived it, then go check out the logbooks.
Fabulous. Stories are definitely the way to do it. I think the way to get to understand a little bit better from a real person's point of view, rather than just in the abstract, which is always a little bit more tricky. I have another question, also from Ian, who's very engaged. I like it. Sorry to ask another question. It's fine. You ask all the questions you like. Do you find that the older generation are often less accepting? My son hasn't come out to anyone else in our family. I'm not sure how they'll react if he chooses to tell them at any point in the future.
Yeah, interesting one. I think it really varies, actually. I mean, if I speak from my personal experience, I came out to my older generation, and my mum's side of the family are Catholic as well. And they couldn't have been more accepting and encouraging of me and my expression of sexuality, coming out as gay. But I was nervous to come out to the older generation. I think that it's best to remember that they grew up in a very different time, and the world looked so different then, and than it does now. They're obviously still here now, which means that they are aware. But I think it's a slow process. But I haven't really come across. I mean, it's all dependent on the individual, of course. But I think at the end of the day, when people are coming out in families who are supported by their parents, and they love the person who's coming out, then that doesn't leave. Maybe there might be some learnings there, some education that you might not need to help them with, maybe some initial comments that aren't particularly helpful. But But I think it's worth, in his own time when he's ready, definitely having the conversation if he feels like he wants to with the rest of the family. A good way to test it, and it's something I did with my grandfather, was to sort of bring up a story or a film about someone who was LGBT and just to see his reaction before I actually did it myself. So a little insider tip, I don't know.
I like that. That is a good shout. And then another comment that's come through. I've taught my kids to be kind around race, gender, and disabilities, and they're brilliant. But now they're teaching me about gender. The tables have turned on educating, and I am very proud of them. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, Catherine, I couldn't agree more. I was doing a session with a group of 16 to 18-year-olds, and I was explaining to them about gender identity and sexuality, and they just went, yeah, we know that, like, everyone's got their own gender identity and sexuality. And I was like, okay, I'm done here then. Cool. They're an amazing generation. They're an amazing generation. We've got a lot to learn from them, definitely.
Yeah. I think we forget, because you get to our sort of age and you feel like you're still a teenager and you don't want to acknowledge that you're actually a grown up. And you look at the next generation and you think they're really old. I'll never be quite that old. But then you realize that today's teenagers don't know what a Walkman was. And then you realize quite how big a gap it's been, which is why there's that much of a gap between us and them as there is between us and our parents. And you look at the way they deal with some things, as you said, it was a very different time. And we look at that and think, wow, how strange is that? Our kids are doing that with us. So I think it's important to be open to, as you said, to learn from them as well, because I'm sure they could teach me some stuff.
Definitely. It's a two-way street, isn't it? It's all about, if you don't look back to history, how can we make a more equal future? So there's a route for both generations in that.
Yeah. The tricky part is letting go of the need to be the expert, I think.
Yes.
As a parent, that's always so tempting, because you were always their Google when they were little. They were like, Mum, what's this?
Oh, yeah.
Well, and you just make it up if needs be, because they were too small to know. But now you can't get away with that anymore, and it's weird.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I'm just trying to think if we've had any other questions that we haven't covered yet, because while we've got you, we should make the most of you.
I've just thought of something which might be helpful for parents. There is something out there called the gender bread person. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a really good way to explain the different types of differences between gender identity, gender expression, sexuality, sex, all those different things. It also comes in the gender unicorn version. Can I share my screen on here? Because I might have one.
Yes, I think you can. It gets a bit interesting if you're only on one screen. It's better with two, but give it a whirl.
Okay, let me see if I can find it. Okay.
It sounds even better than the Ninja Bread Men cutters that I got for making, ninja-shaped bread men. I like it.
Okay, I think we're in. So I've got some on my desktop, which I can show you.
Okay,
so
let me just...
Can you see that?
There we go.
Can you see this?
Yep, that is now on the screen. We are not anymore.
Okay, great. So this is the gender unicorn, and it's a really, really great tool to explain the differences between gender identity, expression, sex assigned at birth, who you're attracted to and emotionally attracted to. And I'll show the other version, which is a gender bread person, which is this one here. And it's sort of just it's a lot of detail. I won't go into it now, but two really good things to sort of learn more yourself. When I first came across it, I thought it was so interesting, but also to maybe help explain it to kids. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, but just to give you a bit of an insight in that.
Marvelous. Right, sorry, just in time. I sprinted off. There's something going off next door, and the cat's opened the door.
Okay.
Do a quick dash over. Can you maybe send me those so I can?
Oh yeah, definitely.
In the show notes and stuff, maybe, because that I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because it's feeling confident enough to have the conversations. That's why we started this whole series of podcasts, because feeling confident enough in the subject matter to start these conversations with your kids is often the reason that parents don't start these conversations with their kids, because they don't know where to begin. Yeah. So with that kind of reference, that would be really, really useful. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And of course, if anyone's got any questions and they want to speak to someone before talking to their children, then you can just reach out to Switchboard, give us a call, and we're happy to talk through whatever the situation is or what might be a good way to explain something like those two designs I just showed you.
Yeah, which would be fab. I'm going to leave the Switchboard thing up for a little bit longer, I think. Now, I thought of another question.
Oh, okay.
Started talking and then it went again. So hang on, let's just, we won't scare it off. We'll see if it comes back.
Okay.
No, it's gone. We'll talk about something else and it'll come back to me. It'll be fine. So we talked about the kind of the tips and tricks for giving your child the opening if they do need to have this kind of conversation with you, whether that's about themselves or whether that's about someone else. And it's things like when something's on the TV, making a comment to the effect, oh yeah, okay, that's just, as if it's perfectly normal and we're okay with that, which can then open up the conversations. And we talked about being supportive of friends.
Yeah.
It's still not coming to me. And it was a really good question. Oh, how annoying.
Were there any other terms that you weren't sure about that might be helpful for me to explain?
I don't know. Does anybody have any questions before, I carry on making a wally of myself by having completely forgotten what I was thinking about? If you do, chuck them in. It just won't come out.
It's okay, no problem.
We'll finish this and then I'll be like, that was what it was. No.
Was it around supporting your children or having the conversations around sexuality and gender identity?
I don't know.
Okay. I think one key thing on everything in order to explain something or try and understand it better is that if anyone, it's all about someone feeling safe, and that's really the key to all of this. If you're kind to people, if you're open to hearing what they need in order to feel safe, then that's what acceptance really comes from. And I think that's at the core of all of this. And it's amazing to look at all of the different sexualities and gender identities that are out there, and this amazing, wonderful spectrum. And it's just, it's wonderful to have those people as part of our wider society, and they should be celebrated, and diversity should be celebrated.
Definitely. I've remembered what it was.
Okay, great.
Magic. The big kind of palaver that there was in the media recently to do with all of this was largely to do with which bathroom do people use.
Yeah.
Seems a little bit overly dramatic. I think. I don't know. I can understand partially some people's points of view, but what are your thoughts on what we could do to make this a less stressful situation? Because I would imagine as a transgender person, that's going to make life quite complicated, because I think we're all very aware in COVID times of just how many times we, for example, go out shopping and we want to use the toilets, and because we're suddenly more aware of that. If that was something that you had to deal with every single time you were out and about, that would obviously be quite a stressful situation. What are your thoughts on?
Yeah, totally. A really interesting point. I think it goes back to that key thing of safety. What makes someone feel safe? And that goes to both sides of the side of the argument. But ultimately, not everywhere has gender neutral bathrooms. So imagine how that must feel for you. You don't have a bathroom that maybe speaks to you, depending on what your gender identity is or gender expression. But I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago, which was written by a non-binary person. So that means that's someone who doesn't see themselves as either male or female. Maybe they flip between the two. Maybe they don't see themselves as either, a bit of both. It's also individual. But it's someone who doesn't identify as male or female bathrooms. And this person, this journalist, was non-binary, and they had a masculine gender expression. So that could be they had short hair, they wore male clothes. They didn't explain exactly, but they were out and there was a male and female toilet. So they chose to go into the female toilet, and they overheard a child saying to their mum, "Mummy, why is that person in these toilets?" And the way that the mum replied, I thought was really powerful. She said, well, I know that we're in the right toilets, so I'm going to trust that they're in the right toilets for them too. And that was it. Just wow. And I think that when people bring up these arguments around safety and sexual predatory in relation to the bathroom arguments, you know, that's not actually talking about transgender people. That's talking about someone else, a different type of person. These people just want to go to the toilet in somewhere that they feel safe. And I guess it's just about trusting everyone to make the right decision.
Well, yeah, it's a bit like saying, well, I'm never going out for a walk ever again in case I run into someone who mugs me or attacks me. It's apples and oranges. Which is why I didn't quite understand why there was quite such heat around the argument. But I suppose for everything, there's always going to be someone that's up in arms about it. So
yeah, definitely. And it comes back to that thing as well of the unknown or change, which is scary. And I think as well, lots of the heat may have come from people who fought for, you know, strong, active feminists who fought for rights. And, you know, we live in a different world to the world that we lived in then. And it's really important as activists or people, you just try to learn and change and evolve with society.
Yeah. And as you said, just be open-minded, be understanding, and be kind.
Yeah.
I think the most powerful message you can give to your kids in relation to anything, but particularly when it's something along these lines where otherwise it's too easy to say something thoughtless. I think that's the thing that I heard most of when I was teaching was kids just saying something thoughtless, which ended up being cruel because they hadn't thought about it when they didn't really mean to be. And I think a lot of it was what was picked up from parents, which is again why it's, I think, so important as a parent to talk to your child about these things in a positive way, because when they can see and learn from you that you're being open-minded, they tend to follow your lead with that. So
yeah, I completely agree with that. You know, it just echoes the whole, I guess, theme that we've had in this conversation is that, you know, children are actually incredibly amazing at understanding very complex things, much better than us. And they come into this world, they're open and friendly and kind and understanding to everyone. And when a young person or a child expresses some negativity or hate, that's learned behavior. That's not understood behavior. And yeah, I think that goes to the crux of it, what you said.
Fab. Well, I think I've now officially run out of questions. We've not had any more questions come in, so I'm gonna leave the switchboard number and site up in case that's of use to anyone, and I'll make sure I get both of those images and pop them in the show notes so that people can see those as well. But I think we have a comment. It's not a new question though. It is a thank you from Ian. Well, I think it's important that we do, because this is how we make a difference. These conversations, these opening up these conversations, these dialogues with your children, this is how we make a difference in the world. And, you know, it is down to us to help make the next generation better than our generation was.
Yes. Yeah.
Keep the snowball growing.
Definitely.
That's definitely the plan. So thank you so much, Tash. That was amazing.
Well, thank you for having me.
Incredibly useful, and lots and lots of useful questions answered. Hopefully that's given people lots to think about and lots to then talk about with their children. So thank you ever so much. And I will catch all of you lovely people next time.
Bye.